A great afternoon to the esteemed participants. I'm so glad to welcome you all on day 4 of the workshop, which also happens to be the second last day as well. Further, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce first resource person for the day, Professor Dr. Rajesh Kumar Sharma, Chairman, Department of English, Punjabi University, Patiala, who's got more than 31 years of teaching experience, which includes teaching literature, language, criticism, film studies, and creative writing. He's a professor of English since 2009. He's been UGC nominee on the advisory committee of the DRC Special Assistance Program of Visva Bharati University, Shanti Niketan. Some of his personal memberships include associate membership of the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, for 3 years, member of the jury, Chandigarh Sahitya Academy, life member of Indian American Center for International Studies, Hyderabad. He's got various books to his credits, including Kavita Dasama, and has translated various dramas and poems from Punjabi into English. So, without any further ado, let me ask and request Professor Sharma to please take over for his technical session. We welcome you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashu Sharma. Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Uh, I will speak today about translating poetry, and I will begin with a poem. I'll share the screen so that you can read. Is it possible to share the screen, please? It has been disabled by the host. Hello, is it okay? I hope you can see the screen now.
Yeah. Perfect, sir.
Right. So here is a poem by the well-known Hindi poet Vishnu Khare. Before we begin to look at the challenges and dimensions of translating poetry, let's look at an example and see how translation begins to happen. So we'll see a few lines, consider the possibilities of translation of those, and then proceed to the issues pertaining to the translation. So जाने से पहले उसने कहा अपनी बेटी समझकर ही मुझे रख लीजिए वह सूखी सांवली लड़की जिसके पसीने में बहुत पैदल चलने कई बसें बदलने की बू थी जिसके बहुत पहने कपड़ों से धूपहीन खोली के सीले गूदड़ों और आम के पुराने अचार की गंध उठती थी उसे मैं वह नौकरी न दे सका बाद में मेरे वे नितांत अस्थाई अधिकार भी रहे नहीं The first two lines are जाने से पहले उसने कहा. Now, what are the possibilities of rendering the first and the second lines into English? Before she went, she said. Before leaving, she said. She said before she left. Before she went away, she said. Before going away, she said. You see, these options allow us to consider the emphasis. Now, if you ask, is there a universal answer? I would say no. The reason is we are dealing with language. And in language, that too, language in literature, there are no exact correspondences most of the time. Most of the time. Sometimes there might be. For me here, What is important is her departure and the words uttered just before the departure. So I would choose before she went away, she said. I'm using the pronoun she twice for the reason that for me, this she is the most important word, wah. Now, this word does not exist in usne as such, right? But I can get my cue from the title. Going away because her leaving the place is much more important. So going can be used, but I would prefer going away. अपनी बेटी समझ कर ही मुझे रख लीजिए. Now, this is where you see a pre-existing translation intervenes. Indian English has been described as a language that is already a translation of English. So it is not British English as such, it is not American English as such, it is Indian English. And Indian English is already a translation. अपनी बेटी समझकर ही मुझे रख लीजिए. When somebody says this in Hindi, in English, it is like, suppose I am your daughter, treat me as your daughter. Imagine I am your daughter. What kind of phrase would you choose? अपनी बेटी समझ कर ही मुझे रख लीजिए. Here, what we have to remember is what kind of person has said this. You see, Aristotle talks about the possible errors in composition. And one of those is when there is a confusion, he says the poet should visualize who is speaking to whom, in what circumstances, for what reason, for what purpose. So, the biggest temptation for the translator is to put his or her own discourse into translation. Here is a girl looking for work and she has not been given work, and her final plea is uh, consider me like your daughter and keep me. This keep me, you can say, does not fit into the translation because keeping has other connotations in English. But remember, the kind of job that is implicit here and the kind of speaker that is implicit here can use keep me. Employ me can be there. Give me the work, give me the job. You have to decide this. So let's say tentatively, I would say, before she went away, she said, treat me, treat me as your own daughter and keep me. वह सूखी सांवली लड़की. Now you see, the second problem is how do we choose to translate this सूखी सांवली? This is a problem of cultural translation. The earlier problem we considered was the problem of discourse. In a specific situation, how the words and phrases are to be selected, if necessary, altered and employed. Here it is Sukhi. Sukhi has so many meanings, you know. Obviously, it cannot be dry. It has to be thin. It cannot be slim. Just consider the word slim here. That thin, would you say dark, dark complexioned, darkish? Would you say not fair, not so fair? That thin, darkish or dark looking, because she is not black. So we cannot use black. Girl, young woman would not be suitable here. Because young woman has a certain the connotation of political discourse sensitive to gender. That thin, darkish girl जिसके पसीने में बहुत पैदल चलने कई बसें बदलने की बू थी. I want you to consider the word boo here. See, there are four kinds of, uh, shall we say, odor, smell, stink, scent. Which word would we use? Because look at the range. It is the odor of old pickle, old mango pickle. It is of the damp old clothes, and it is of changing several buses, and it is of sweat. And actually, it is not of sweat, it is of walking a lot in sweat. See, there is a transfer from sweat to walking instead of the other way around. So the poet has reversed the direction of the object that smells. And then changing the buses, changing several buses itself does not produce any odor. But imagine how it is transferred into an odor or a smell, right? Now you see, the question in the translation of poetry centrally is, as far as I have felt it, of addressing the nature of poetic language. Poetic language, I am now reverting from the shared screen, I'll return to it later. One second. Yeah. So, you see, the poetic language is not the usual kind of language that we find in prose. One, poetic language is uh, largely what you call non-expository. There can be expository poetry also, but uh, distinctively poetic language is non-expository. It is compact and it is suggestive. So, what do we expect of the translator? The translator has to be a sensitive, cultivated reader of language and especially of poetic language. And the kind of reading that the uh, translator of poetry is supposed to perform is a stereophonic reading. I mean, the poet has to listen to two languages at the same time. The language that is the what you call the, I'll not say source language, I'll say the language of the preceding text or the existing text and the language of the succeeding text or the text to be created, right? So the language from which the translation is taking place and the language into which it is taking place. The poet as a reader has to listen to the two languages together. And really the beauty of this attempt of translation lies in the music that is generated between the two languages, where the two languages meet or where they differ, right? So, uh, three things then, just to go back. One, translation has to be sensitive to the cultural specificity of the text that is being translated, the discourse employed in that text. Three, it has to be sensitive to the literary artistic dimensions of the text, because a poem, like any good piece of prose like an essay or a story or a novel or a drama or an epic, is a work of art. And a work of art is a work into which a lot of effort has gone aesthetically and in the uh, and by way of construction of multi-layered meaning, right? So the difficulty now lies in rendering music. You know, several kinds of rhyme and rhythm in one language are untranslatable in another. But what does the poet then do? Sorry, what does the translator then do? The second best thing a translator can do is uh, try and catch the voice and the tone. The voice and the tone. You see, it has been said about the translations of Anna Akhmatova that the translators aimed not at the exact rendering of the Russian poems of Akhmatova, but the voice that was speaking those poems into their ears. So much so that sometimes they would skip phrases, sometimes add phrases to lend that typical kind of voice, a presence in their translation. If you find some of these things that I am mentioning a bit difficult to clearly comprehend, you will see once you begin to translate, if you have not done this before, these will materialize as actual problems, challenges, and accomplishments. Then the problems in translation arise essentially from the ability or inability to address the relationship between language and consciousness. What do you think of language? If we have thought a bit about language, we have studied about the nature of language, something theoretically, philosophically, the likelihood is that we shall have more answers available, right? For example, Bhartrihari understands consciousness as always, already. I'm using a Hegelian phrase, always, already linguistic. That there is no consciousness without language. So much so, he says that if a person has still not learned a language, his or her consciousness is also, in a way, proto-linguistic. Proto-linguistic. So there is some kind of structure already there which allows a person to be conscious because it is by means of this vehicle of language or proto-language that you transact with objects of thought, of reflection, of perception in your cognition, right? So language is not to be treated, as I think most of us by now understand, language is not to be treated as something that exists on its own. That language is not a container in which meaning lies deposited. Language is a process in which meaning is happening always. So that Saussure has given us this lesson, right? Derrida has talked about it. And of course, I mentioned Bhartrihari in the Indian context. You see, Aristotle long back talked about potentiality, that uh, if a poem can be translated from one language into another, the potential of translation into the other language is already there in the first language, in the language of the poem in which it was written, right? So it is like what Benjamin was talking about in his The Task of the Translator, that the translator does not create something new. The translator is a person who actualizes an immanent potentiality already there in the so-called original. I'm saying so-called original because it is not original. Because language cannot be original in that radical sense in which something happens as an event producing something altogether new, right? Because if language were original, we would not be able to communicate and all, and we would not be able to translate at all. So, what do we think of language determines what expectations we have of translation and what methods of translation we employ. So it's like people sometimes trying to find words in language B for words in language A and doing sometimes some extremely funny things. This is textual fundamentalism and it serves no purpose. You see, languages have grown only by rubbing against each other and by borrowing from each other and giving to each other. Textual fundamentalism does not take us anywhere. And translation is a force that actually fights against this tendency to textual fundamentalism, right? Because translation is a transaction between cultures and histories and times and languages and persons and readers and writers. And at a certain point, the translator has a very ambivalent entity. Is the translator or a reader or a writer? Is he both? Or is he neither? When you try to ponder these questions, you are unable to take a final call on what translation is and what the translator is, right? So it was an answer to this that led us to that formulation, which is now quite popular in translation studies. In place of saying the original text or the source text, we now use the expression preceding text and the succeeding text, right? So PT and ST, which means temporally the two texts are differentiated, but the privilege of originality is not given to any text. This saves you from that mistaken idea that the original is something that we have to try to reproduce in the translation. See, this is where, in fact, Walter Benjamin was, I think, the most radical thinker of translation. He said that in translation, the original is a point of takeoff. And if the translation in a servile way follows the source text, then it has failed. The translator has to take off. But he also says in the same essay that it is like uh, think of a vase, think of an urn, right? An urn that does not exist, but that exists potentially. So each translation contributes a fragment to that total urn or vase of the future. Hence, the poem, when it is written, or a text, when it is written, and I'm talking about literary texts, in a language, carries within itself the potential texts that will be created by translation in future. This is what Benjamin was clearly indicating in that signal essay, right? Actually, the task of the translator is still the most thought-provoking essay to have ever been written by anybody anywhere. Well, I've said that translation is essentially a work of reading. See, if you cannot read, if you do not know how to read, forget about translation. The novelist Stephen King was asked by somebody, what do you think is required of a writer? He said the first thing is composition. If you cannot compose correctly, forget that you can be a writer. Then he says other things follow, like writing simply, writing cleanly, writing musically, writing effectively. Those are the things that follow. For the translator, the most important thing is the ability to read, and this is a competence that has to be cultivated continually. You see, translation requires actually triple activity at the same time. As you grow into translation, into the practice of translating, you realize that reading feeds into your writing, reading and writing feed into your translation, writing feeds into your reading, translation feeds into both. So it becomes a kind of triangle. Reading, writing, translating, all three are continually building the other two, right? Each is building the other two. And a circle moves both ways, left to right and right to left. Now, uh, in the tantric tradition in India, we have two very interesting uh, concepts, Bindu and Nad. Right? Rajshekhar refers to these in his, uh, what's the title of that uh, great work? Who's here? Anyway, Kava Mimamsa. Yeah, Kava Mimamsa. Bindu and Nad. Bindu refers to the visual dimension of the aesthetic experience. Nad refers to the dimension of the oral, the heard, the sound. Okay, so the visual and the oral, what you see and what you hear. The experience of literature is actually an experience of the visual and the oral together. Right? So the image, imagination, and the music. And of course, the music includes silence. Right? The translator has to pay attention to the two together. And when I said voice, voice refers to the presence of the singular person of the writer. And of course, when the translator translates text, then it becomes a new kind of persona. Personality undergoes a change. The voice gets now inflected with a second voice, the voice of the translator, who is trying to uh, speak in the ghostly voice of the writer of the text. Right? But that dimension of music is something that, if it is missing in a translation of poetry, even when it is free verse, makes you feel that something extremely vital is lacking. Actually, in prose writing also, you see the aspect of rhythm in any good sentence determines how well we breathe. You know, a good text that has been recommended for the writer is try to speak or speak aloud what you have written. And if it does not interfere disturbingly with your breathing patterns, it is a good piece of writing to begin with. Now it can be improved. So if the reader feels that his breathing is being disturbed, the likelihood, according to that writer, is that the writer will dislike the reader will dislike the writing for some reason which she probably does not understand. Some of them might do, but most of them would say, well, I didn't enjoy this. So this kind of rus is, first of all, the rus at the level of comfort. So it is this comfort we are talking about, the comfort at the level of breathing. And this is where punctuation comes, right? Where the breaks come, where the caesura comes, where enjambment comes in poetry. Punctuation marks are the breathing stops, pauses in any uh, you see paragraph or any longer text or any sentence or any part of a sentence. And punctuation is something that remains marginalized in the consciousness of most of the readers and writers. You read a text, but you do not pay attention to the punctuation because one reason is the way we are taught the study of language, especially English in India, is by focusing on the rules of putting words together and not on punctuation. Punctuation is supposed to be the minimal necessary evil that we have to live with. And you can see grown up scholars punctuating their writing poorly. Repunctuate your writing, and you'll be able to breathe intellectually your way into greater power as a thinker. Just try this and you will see how much change takes place. Now, Bindu can be visualized as what you call imaginary. Right? I'm using a term from Charles Taylor, the Canadian thinker. It is partly a Lacanian term, but also not entirely Lacanian. The poet Wallace Stevens is also being invoked here. That is, imagination has its own reality. So, what the poem produces for you and what makes it so powerful is one, the imaginary into which it takes you, two, the soundscape into which it takes you. So, if you can create something resembling these in your translation to whatever degree of possibility, largely determines the success of your translation in your own eyes. Right? You see, you will never find everybody agreeing with your translation because, after all, translation is first of all an interpretation. But you will know whether you have succeeded or you have utterly failed or you are somewhere close to success. Right? So these are the tests. So I can say the voice and tone can be included with this, and the imaginary. Right? So Bindu and Naad. Naad and Bindu. Well, Benjamin uses an expression non-sensuous correspondence, talking about mimesis in the context of translation. Look how we connect ideas with ideas and understand things. This is the work actually of translation. Translation is not simply verbal, translation is also an intellectual exercise. Plato's idea of mimesis through Aristotle becomes at a certain point translation, right? Call it anukriti, call it anuvad. Translation is also an exercise in imitation, creating a copy, but a copy which is not an exact copy, but which is based on something but might diverge significantly from it, might diverge significantly. Several examples are there from painting to architecture to sculpture to writing. Okay, think of the shield of Achilles in Homer. Think of the compassion or the pieta, the pity, Michelangelo's sculpture, in which a young mother is holding Christ removed from his cross. So the dead body of a young son of 32 in the lap of a young mother. And the mother looks hardly 30. And an answer to this that is given by art critics is Christ's mother is ageless. And Michelangelo did know this when he created that great sculpture. But what is even more intriguing is the expanse of the mother's lap. It is such a huge lap. It is the lap of the mother of the Son of God. So it is disproportionately huge. Now, it is this that I mean by copy, but not an exact replica. Translation is like this. The translator, as an artist, perceives something which is not to be rendered as it is. And in any case, what is the point of rendering something in another language exactly as it is? One, it is not possible. Two, even if it is possible, why do it? See, this is the distinction between a poor translator and a good translator. A poor translator thinks, well, this is a sentence, I'll render it like this. A good translator will probe the uh, possibilities latent in the sentence and then try to render those in his her reading and in the translation, right? So translation in that sense then becomes a creative act. Then look at sorry, go back to the idea of non-sensuous correspondence. Non-sensuous correspondence in the sense that, you see, when you are making a painting of an actual object, let us say you're painting a still life, it is a sensuous correspondence that determines the imitation. There are apples before you and you're making apples on the canvas. But in poetry, you cannot show apples, you can evoke apples through words, through images, through music. Benjamin referred to this radical limitation, but also radical possibility in translation. Why? Because this is the nature of language. Language does not correspond to things in terms of pictorial images. Language works by suggesting. And obviously, then this opens up the possibility of different people reading the same text differently, and then different translators rendering the same text differently in their translations. And then you have the third thing, the objective correlative of T.S. Eliot. Don't you think objective correlative is also a kind of translation? I would say it is a sensuous correspondence that determines the objective correlative. Things, objects are used to produce a certain complex of emotions, right? So what does the poet try to do? The poet tries to produce a kind of visual composite, to produce a non-visual experience. Is this not a translation? Right. Then this, I think, will automatically answer your question. How much freedom does the translator have? You see, the translator has freedom, but the translator does not have license. I'll give you uh, a recent example from a translation in Punjabi of Kafka's Trial. Translating Kafka's Trial, the translator was unable to get under the skin of the writer. As far as we can, we should try to get into the skin of the writer. So one thing that has emerged in recent readings of the trial is that Kafka, having done a PhD in law, is intentionally using legal terminology in his text, which most translators earlier had simply overlooked. Then, what this translator did was he changed the gender of the cook. And because nowadays you say, मैंने घंटी बजाई, घंटी का मतलब होगा I gave a ring means that I called somebody on my mobile phone. Now, actually, in Kafka's case, it is pressing the button of the bell in your room so that the person in the kitchen or in the other room can come. So you're calling somebody. He says उसने phone दी घंटी घुमाई instead of saying he pressed the button of the bell. Now you see, this is the kind of mistake that happens when you don't try to get behind the appearances and you think that, well, translation is something that can simply be transferred from one language to another at the level of an idea. No, it is not that. Language and what is in language are inseparable. We do talk about ideas, concepts, and their expression, but actually, there are no ideas without their expression, and no concepts without their expression. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, those make a distinction between three things which became central to semiotics later in France, which is also there in like Buddhism. The three things are there is Shabd, there is Earth, and there is Pratyay. Pratyay in the sense of concept. So there is the word cow, there is the animal cow, and there is the concept cow. So when you are creating a character, how does the character conceptualize something? How does the character think a cow in his consciousness, in her consciousness? That will lend authenticity to the character created. Unless you try and reach that, as a reader, forget about attempting a good translation, right? So there are not actually good and bad translations. There are good and indifferent translations, I would say. Translations which pay attention to the text, translations which do not pay attention. Uh, how should a translator begin? I understand that there are young people participating in this workshop, and I am particularly addressing those. You see, a very good idea for a beginner in translation is to begin with fragments. Take, let's say, the statements, those wonderful epigrammatic statements made by Oscar Wilde. Okay. Then take short poems, take haiku, take an isolated sentence from a remarkable writer, might be from prose or from poetry. Render that in the language of translation. You will be able to focus microscopically, and you will not have the pressure to complete a longer passage. So begin with sentence long texts, then fragments, paragraphs, and an excellent exercise would be translate your own work. What you have written in one language, try to do it in another. And the moment you try to do that, you realize that another language has other possibilities. And then you realize that every language allows a certain kinds of sensibility to become operational, certain kinds of thinking to happen uh, more spontaneously or less spontaneously. And the benefit of practicing translation regularly is that you're able to dialectically move between two or more languages between which you are translating. Actually, Neruda's translations have been published in multiple translations. You see, his poetry has been published in multiple translations in the same volumes, so that you can read one poem originally in Spanish with two or three different translations at different times by different translators. And you can see how much difference it makes from translator to translator. Rilke has similarly been translated so many times. Flaubert's Madame Bovary has been translated so many times. Always compare different translations and don't try to compare the whole translation. Just pick up randomly a passage or select a kind of touchstone sentence or passage and then try to see the comparison. Like the opening sentence of the trial has been a test. So if you know that the two most important places in a sentence in prose are the ending of the sentence and the beginning of the sentence for the writer. You will know that Kafka ending the opening sentence with these particular 2 or 3 words has to be "he did," so that in your translation you do not shift the focus. You see, it is something usually known to writers that the last place in a sentence is the most important and the first place is the second most important. So if you also learn how to write, you are able to learn how to read. And translation, being the translation of literature here, of poetry here, depends upon our ability to write well and to appreciate the act of writing, the act of composition, right? So as translators, we don't read like critics. As translators, we read like artists, as craftspeople, as writers. Okay, we return to Vishnu Khare, and there are about now 13 minutes left. Yeah, so I will share the screen again with you and take you to another poem of Vishnu Khare, which uh, I would like to share with you again. Uh, what is it? Can I do it? Oh, I think there's some problem. Hello, am I audible? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'll share the screen again. Yeah. So
Yes, sir, you're very well audible. You're very well audible.
right. Thank you, thank you. Yes. Here is a poem, Koshish. Mm, I'll enlarge it a bit, but not too much. Yes. This is a poem about birds, sparrows. In order to place the translation in its context, we have to know what the translation is about and what is the mood of the poem, right? So for that purpose, for translation, we'll come to the last part of the poem, but in order to get an idea of its emotional temper, we'll have to read the poem from the beginning. शाम को खुश लौटती हुई चिड़ियों से मैं पूछना चाहता हूँ एक अशुभ सवाल कि आखिर वे मरने के लिए कहाँ जाती हैं, लेकिन वे मेरी तरफ उसी तरह देखती या न देखती हुई गुजर जाती हैं जिस तरह पार्क की ठंडी बेंच पर बैठे हुए खाली निगाह वाले बूढ़े के पास से स्कूल से लौटती हुई लड़कियां चली जाती हैं। चिड़ियों की मृत्यु मेरे लिए एक रहस्य है और यहाँ मेरा अर्थ पिंजरों में लटकाए गए पक्षियों की मौत से नहीं है जिनके पंजों से तीलियों को छुड़ाना कठिन हो जाता है और अचानक उड़ान में बिजली के तारों या मोटर के पहियों में फंस गए कौओं के शरीर से भी मैं उसे समझने की कोशिश नहीं करूंगा, क्योंकि आदमियों और आदमियों की चीजों के संपर्क से आई हुई चिड़ियों की मृत्यु मेरा विषय नहीं है। Right? In the first 2 stanzas, Khare is describing what he comprehends by death here, what kind of death of the sparrows he is denoting. Uh, in Avadhut Gita and in the Upanishads also, the death that has been wished for by the sage is the death which comes like the falling of a leaf from a tree. The leaf that has grown old on the tree breaks away effortlessly and glides down and dies. And the sage wishes that my death should be like this. So he's talking about that death of the birds which comes to them not in an accident in our civilization, but which happens naturally. Now we come to that stanza which I would wish you to translate, and which we will start today, and maybe this kind of translation can never be completed. नहीं मैं देखना चाहता हूं चिड़ियों को उस क्षण में जब वह आखिरी उड़ान के पहले अपना आप निश्चित करती हैं कि यह सॉरी नहीं मैं देखना चाहता हूं चिड़िया को उस क्षण में जब वह आखिरी उड़ान के पहले अपने आप निश्चित करती है कि यह उसकी आखिरी उड़ान है और बिल्कुल पहले ही की तरह उठ जाती है घड़ियों और नक्शों के बाहर उस जगह के लिए जहां एक असंभव वृक्ष पर बैठकर चुप होते हुए उसे एक अदृश्य चिड़िया बन जाना है। देखना ही चाहता हूं क्योंकि न मैं चिड़ियों का संकल्प पा सकता हूं और न उड़ान, मैं सिर्फ अपनी मृत्यु में उनकी कोशिश करना चाहता हूं। I find this an extremely complex idea. I'll tell you why. I hope most of you can already sense the difficulty in the reading of this poem. नहीं मैं देखना चाहता हूं. Did you notice that there is no comma after nothing? Usually we would put a comma there. But you can drop a comma when you do not want any pause. You want a continuity. So punctuation also exists as a set of rules to be violated in the interest of the text. Now we have to decide whether in English we can do this or not. And let me tell you, we can do this. नहीं मैं देखना चाहता हूं चिड़िया को उस क्षण में उस क्षण में brings the first line of this stanza to an end. That is, if we are visualizing the movement of the words in the line, then the final focus before there is a shift to the next line is on the moment, on the instant. जब वह आखिरी उड़ान के पहले अपने आप निश्चित करती है कि यह उसकी आखिरी उड़ान है. The poet could have shifted from आखिरी to अंतिम. He does not. The translator has to catch this emphasis on the repetition of the word. See, there is an element of self-determination in the act of choosing death. It is like the bird decides, I'm flying for the last time, and when the flight ends, I will die. Can we human beings also decide when we will die? You have stories of people who decided when to die and they died at that time. और बिल्कुल पहले ही की तरह, apparently there is no difference. As it used to take a flight, it has again taken off. But see, this is where the difficulty comes. How do you render it? If you cannot understand it, you see, as a reader, or if you cannot understand the difficulty of it as a reader, how can you render it in translation? So the precondition of translation is the reading. उठ जाती है घड़ियों और नक्शों के बाहर उस जगह के लिए बिल्कुल पहले ही की तरह उठ जाती है घड़ियों और नक्शों के बाहर उस जगह के लिए जहां एक असंभव वृक्ष पर बैठकर चुप होते हुए उसे एक अदृश्य चिड़िया बन जाना है. उठ जाती है घड़ियों और नक्शों के बाहर. How would you render it? I don't know. I have tried and I have tried, and there are, you see, uh, tentative attempts. Like one tentative attempt would be trying to visualize this movement. The sparrow rises, it's like levitation, and she exceeds the time, she exceeds the clocks, she goes beyond clocks. She rises above and floats, drifts as if outside the clocks, beyond the clocks that keep time. Or naksho, naksho. Is it features or is it maps? So anything that can be naksha refers to space, a space, spatial organization. Ghadi, temporal organization. Like always before. So there is no difference here. The sparrow exceeds time and space. This would be a conceptual rendering, but a bad translation. Can we retain the images and also translate this exceeding of her? उठ जाती है बाहर. See, it is not चली जाती है बाहर, उड़ जाती है बाहर. No, उठ जाती है बाहर. As if she goes into an ecstasy, rises out of her body, with her body, leaves the worlds of clocks and of maps, goes outside them, and goes for that place. उस जगह के लिए is not वहां चली जाती है. No, she proceeds towards that place where there is an impossible tree and where she will sit quietly and will become an invisible sparrow. An invisible sparrow on an impossible tree. Already, you see, time and space have been left behind. In another dimension of existence, which is impossible if considered from within the dimensions in which we normally exist within time and space. She has to go there. He says, I cannot actually think like a sparrow. I cannot cognize like a sparrow. देखना ही चाहता हूं. And see, here is the key to the nature of poetry. What you cannot think, you can possibly see. You know, Aristotle meant by theory thinking that is as clear as seeing. So to theorize is to think like seeing. देखना ही चाहता हूं, imagination that enables you to see without eyes. देखना ही चाहता हूं because this imagination will take you beyond conceptual uh, meaning. I can always conceptualize the world of the sparrows, their inner world, but no, it is not possible. But yes, I can imagine it. देखना ही चाहता हूं क्योंकि ना मैं चिड़ियों का संकल्प पा सकता हूं. See how little a man is in front of an apparently small bird, which is not even a human being. The human being is unable to achieve pasakana, right? The ability to think that the sparrows have, the ability to imagine, the ability to project. Or na udan, nor can I have a flight. And this flight is not the physical flight only. Remember, it's a flight towards an asambhava vriksh and towards becoming an adrishya chidiya. मैं सिर्फ अपनी मृत्यु में उनकी कोशिश करना चाहता हूं. And here comes the most difficult thing in the poem. The poet could have said, मैं सिर्फ अपनी मृत्यु में उसकी तरह कोशिश करना चाहता हूं. It is not उसकी तरह कोशिश, it is उनकी कोशिश. In my death, I want to die as a man and become sparrows. And I want to attempt what sparrows attempt. Death for me should be an exceeding. Now you are able to connect, you see. And unless you are able to read the apparently harmless, simple, small words in their meanings, you are unable to make sense of the poem's gravity. And how can then you translate? So when he says, उठ जाती है घड़ियों और नक्शों के बाहर, now you realize उनकी कोशिश करना चाहता हूँ. I also want to exceed my world of space and time as a human being and enter that world into which the birds will fly, or they do fly when they die, when they're about to die. And I want to die, not like them, but I want to die their death. Right? So my point is, read as widely as possible and read intelligently and bravely, audaciously, connect and try to find meaning. I hope whatever I said did make some sense. Thank you very much. I am stopping the sharing here, and my gratitude to every listener. Thank you so much. I hope I kept time. I have exceeded by 2 minutes. Sorry for that.
Not at all, sir. Not at all. Thank you very much indeed. You've very aptly highlighted the
Thank you.
basic triangular or cyclic association between reading, writing, and translating. Undoubtedly, without a complete mastery over both the facets of both the languages involved, a translator cannot do justice to the critical task of translation. The experience of visual image, imagination, and music is must for a writer as well as a translator. And the music doesn't only lie in words, rather, it is a literary paradox that understanding the silence of punctuations also contributes to the music of poetry equally. So, rather, in a very short span of time, you've provided an exceptionally wide coverage to the critical views of Slowacki, Benjamin, Franz Kafka, and Oscar Wilde, while providing an engrossing practical exercise on translating poetry simultaneously. There are certain queries which I would like you to address, sir. The first one,
Yeah, please.
which was often asked by the participants, is how far it is possible to retain the stylistic elements of the original text of the poetry while translating into the translated version into the source language, into the targeted language. So,
Uh, you see, one, it depends upon the availability of the, rather the, you can say, if the succeeding text and the preceding text both belong to a same cultural formation, yes, then there might be a possibility of retaining some stylistic similarity. Otherwise, you see, what has happened is, from critical practices, we have received some kind of like baggage. Because we read critically in terms of style, we think style can be treated as a separate issue. I would rather say that a literary text is to be treated organically, right? So style will emerge of its own. We don't have to like strive after it. So the most important thing for me is, if the poem has a very strong voice of the poet, then the voice should be recreated as far as possible.
so keeping authorial
And
voice,
yes, the, yeah,
yeah. So keeping authorial voice
author's voice, and you see,
and
yeah,
intention in
author's voice, and you see, after all, when I say organic, I mean the, what is the purpose of translation after all? The source text or the preceding text is being given a new home. If you are just planting it there without giving it a home, then what's the purpose of translation? So style is something subordinate, which will be natural.
which would eventually follow.
And then it depends on follow, but see, style is the most difficult thing to achieve for any artist. Style is, see, Proust said that style is your personal window on the world. How many people know how they see the world? And how do they express it? An artist is able to do that towards the end of his career. The translator should not be dreaming that high, I think, initially. That is something that will gradually come. And the translator has to have his own style in the translation.
So there is no fixing mechanism, you mean? In short, it is the organic whole
No,
which
no,
is
no, not at all.
there is no fixing
In
mechanism.
literature, certainly not.
Yeah.
Literature, certainly not.
Thank you
Anything
very much,
else?
sir. Thank you very much, sir, for
Thank you. All the
for
best.
investing your valuable time with us. Rather, your encyclopedic and awe-inspiring knowledge has enriched us immensely. Thank you. We are highly gratitude to you.
Thanks a lot for this wonderful opportunity of interacting with so many young people. And thanks a lot.
The entire
Okay, bye-bye.
gain is ours. The entire gain is ours. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now let me announce the next speaker for the day, Dr. Ashfaq Ahmed from Department of Arabic, Faculty of Arts, Banaras Hindu University, who's also a recipient of President of India Award, Maharshi Badrayan Vyas Samman in 2013 in recognition of substantial contribution in the field of Arabic. He is also the founder editor of the literary annual Arabic journal Al Surokai Hindi, published by the Department of Arabic, Assam University, Silchar. Further, he has occupied various official positions, including working with Central Monitoring Service sections of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. He's also worked with the Embassy of Arab Republic of Egypt, Press Information Bureau, New Delhi as translator. He's also a widely published author with 5 books to his credit and innumerable papers and articles in refereed national and international journals. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Thank you, madam.
Kindly proceed with your session, sir.
Thanks a lot. First of all, I'm grateful to you all for inviting me for this lecture. I hope I'll be able to finish in time. Arabic, English, Arabic translation, problems and opportunities. I have slightly modified my headline. I had told you over phone also. To start with my paper, I would like to mention some of the major points about the translation. What is translation? I'm not going to discuss in detail about the theory and practice of the translation. I'm giving you an overall overview of the translation from Arabic to English and from English to Arabic. Translation has been one of the most diverse means of communication. It is as old as the human history itself. Among the characteristics of a man is to interact with the people of other tribes or nations. The culture, scientific diversity, art, and technology of a nation or civilization were or are transferred to the other nation or civilization through translation. The importance of translation has increased manifold in today's world due to widespread migration, immigration, and globalization. The translation provides immense opportunities to the people of a culture or civilization or region to learn and earn from the people of other cultures or civilization or the region. Translation means transferring contents of one language to another. It's needless to say that each language has its own linguistic characteristics. The idioms, proverbs, phonology, grammar, style, sound, and vocabulary of a language are largely different from another language, especially when we take 2 international languages into consideration like Arabic and English. Translation from Arabic to English and from English to Arabic becomes more difficult simply because they belong to 2 different language groups. Arabic is a very rich ancient Semitic language, while English is relatively a modern language and belongs to the Indo-European language family. The culture which these 2 languages represent are wholly different from each other. Translation has been playing a very significant role in transferring knowledge from one distinct culture to another and helps the culture of a nation enriching the culture of another region or people. Translation has been an important source for income as well. In Arabic context, a huge number of translators were employed by the Abbasid rulers during the 8th and 9th centuries AD to transfer the Greek, the Roman, the Persian, the Indian knowledge, and the Indian knowledge into Arabic. The Baitul Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom, or the Open Library, established by the legendary Emperor Harun al-Rashid, who died in 808 AD, and nurtured by his son Mamun al-Rashid, who ruled until 833 AD at Baghdad, offered lucrative salaries and a high administrative post to the translators. The Indian translators also commanded respect at Baghdad for translating a good number of books in Sanskrit, good number of books in Sanskrit into Arabic, particularly books on Ayurveda and mathematics. The importance and earnings of today's Arabic translators have increased manifold, especially due to the globalization. A number of speakers may have already discussed with you about the art of translation, its different definitions and meanings, and must have shared with you the views of the renowned translators from across the world. It therefore deems unnecessary to repeat the same things and share with you the similar views. Nevertheless, it can be mentioned here that since every language has its own characteristics and distinct features of grammar, phonology, morphology, style, vocabulary, and usage, the complete transformation of the source language into the target language is not possible. Some experts believe that translation, and I quote, translation is the exchange of the meaning of a source language text by means of an equivalent target language text. Sorry. Another expert says, and I quote, translation is the replacement of textual material in one language by equivalent textual material in another language. This is how many experts have expressed their views about the translation and method of translation and art of translation. I'm not going to elaborate on these points. The translator must possess the required knowledge and skills to do justice to his or her work. In Arabic, English, Arabic context, the translator must have the command over both the languages and must be well versed in grammar, phonology, morphology, vocabulary, style, and usage. She or he must also be aware of the culture of both the languages. If someone wants to translate the literary pieces, she or he should be well versed in both the literatures and their trends and issues. The Arabic translator faces many problems while transferring contents of one language to another. For different reasons, it's very difficult to discuss all the problems in this brief paper. However, the efforts will be made to highlight the major difficulties which the translator faces. Since some of the participants may not be very good in Arabic grammar and phonology, a number of typical points are being excluded from this discussion. The different experts have suggested different methods for the translation. These are literal vis-a-vis free, formal vis-a-vis dynamic, non-pragmatic vis-a-vis pragmatic, non-creative vis-a-vis creative, and so on and so forth. In other words, the translation can be A, manual, B, mechanical, or creative, literal, or free. Translation, as they say, is either literal or free. Through literal translation, the translator conveys the meanings of words, phrases, or sentences from one language, which is largely called as the source language, to another, TL or target language. The literal translation is not considered as a good idea, especially when the two entirely different languages are involved, like Arabic and English. Nevertheless, there are instances where this method of translation works. For example, in Arabic, if someone say, as we popularly use this, everything is fair in love and war. So that meaning love and war. So it can be translated as it is, exactly without changing the structure. For example, al-hubb wal-harb can be translated as love and war, simply. The literal method of translation can be used in three different ways. That is, those are word for word translation. For example, translating the meaning of SL or source language in the same number of words or sentences into the target language. This may become problematic for conveying meaning properly. This is not considered as a good method of translation. This means each word, phrase, idiom, noun, adjective, and proverb of a source language should be translated into the similar word, phrase, idiom, noun, adjective, and proverb of the target language. This is a broader form of translation. C, literal translation of meaning. This is a direct or close translation. It is the translation of meaning as accurately and closely as possible. Here, target grammar or word order is taken into consideration. This method of translation provides different meanings in different meaning of the different text, context, and combination with other words. This is considered as the most acceptable method of translation. For example, if the Arabic word is taken as tuhibbuhu kathiran, exactly the meaning of the translation, the meaning of these words into English would be, she loves him too much. Tuhibbuhu kathiran, she loves him too much or a lot. Another method of translation or name given to it is free translation. This is considered as a better method of translation that is than the literal translation. In this method, the wording, structure, and grammar of the source text is rendered into translation as accurately as possible. This means reproducing the meaning of the original text into the second source. Here, the meaning is more important than the form. This method is convenient for both the translator and the reader. For example, if we use this, when we say in Arabic, Fatima, Fatatun, Jamilatun, wa Tabibatun, Tayyibatul Qalb, it can be translated very beautifully as it is in Arabic, as Fatima is a beautiful girl and a kind-hearted doctor. Exactly is the same. Exact meaning is taken, and the structure of the sentences are not changed at all. The Arabic translator is encountered with various sorts of problems. A, grammatical problems. While translating the text, the translator must take into consideration the syntax of the two different languages. For example, Hal tuhibbu Kashmir? Do you like Kashmir or do you love Kashmir? In this case, the English do or did have the equivalences in Arabic as hal, and many other words are there. Some other words are there. For the 5 English W's, why, when, where, how, these 5 W's we call 5 W's. The Arabic has their equivalences as well, such as man, mata, ma, aina, kaifa, and some other words are also there. For example, Mahmoud, kaifa anta? In English, it can be rendered as Mahmoud, how are you? Exactly the same. The second the method is word order. In English, sentence formation, subject plus verb plus objective or complement pattern is used. For example, Mahmoud went to market. This is first noun, then the verb, then the complement or object. This means that English has only the nominal sentences, which the people generally use as SVC, subject, verb, and complement. While Arabic has both the nominal and verbal sentences, English, as I told you, that only nominal sentences are there, but in Arabic, there are in fact three kinds of sentences. Three types of sentences can be made. One is verb, then a subject, then complement or object, and then another is noun or subject. I mean, this in Arabic it can be a verbal sentence or as well as the nominal sentences. There is a third kind of sentences also in Arabic, that is verb first, then complement, then subject. This is also possible in Arabic. And I am given here one example only to understand all these three Arabic sentences. زار محمود دولا عديدة أو محمود زار دولا عديدة أو محمود بكل النجاح زار دولا عديدة. In Arabic, these three sentences which are possible in Arabic can be formed in Arabic, should be and must be translated into only nominal sentences. That is, Mahmoud visited a number of countries and Mahmoud successfully. What I told you, the in between subject and object or complement comes the complement. Subject and object complements also can come in Arabic. So these Arabic sentences can be translated in English as Mahmoud visited a number of countries, and second sentence, Mahmoud successfully. I added in Arabic successfully in between the verb. Successfully visited a number of countries. In so far tenses are concerned, Arabic and English have two different types of tenses, present and past. Arabic has Arabic has no progressive and perfective form tenses. For progressive and perfective forms, extra words are used. For example, al-an, hatta al-an, ma zala, lam yazal, these kind of words are added to show the continuity, what we call the progressive or perfective sentences. Personal pronoun. The personal pronouns can be omitted in Arabic if emphasis is not required. For example, akalna nahnu tufahatin. Akalna tufahatin. In akalna, there is a noun, a pronoun that we can omit also if we do not want any emphasis to be made on that. So simply, akalna tufahatin. The nahnu, which is hidden here, can be omitted also, and it can be translated. It should be translated as we ate some apples. Akalna tufahatin. We ate some apples. Adjective in English generally comes before the nouns. In Arabic, they generally come after the nouns. It is otherwise. For example, qittatun bayda, which should be translated into English as a white cat. Qittatun bayda. So here bayda is adjective and qitta is cat, a cat, and bayda is the white cat. So it's this noun comes first and the adjective comes thereafter into different languages, differently into different languages. So we have to say qittatun bayda, a white cat. Gender and number. English has three genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter. While in Arabic, there are only two genders, that is masculine and feminine. This neutral gender is not available in Arabic. Gender numbers. English has only two gender numbers, singular and plural, but Arabic has a third number also, which is called dual. Dual means when we call two students. In Arabic, only one word is enough for that. Talibani. Taliban, if someone calls Talibani, that means two male students. If someone calls it Talibatani, that means two female students. So one word is enough to indicate that there are two students, male or female. Monosomy, the word which has only one meaning that we all know. The monosemous words in source language do not create problems in target language. Likewise, polysemy also there. The polysemous word in source language create problems in textual language. Sorry, in target language, because there will be because, for example, in Arabic, if someone is translating the names of the horses or horse, any horse, there are usually believed that more than 300 names have been given by the Arabs to their horses. So each word for a horse differs from the horse particularly may differ in color or size or height or in many other difference or here in many things from each other. So if a word has more than one meaning, then while translating from Arabic to English or English to Arabic, it may create problem for the translator. So a translator has to be very careful about that also. Synonymy, the words which have the same meaning as we know, such words in the source language cause problems in target language because each word has a specific meaning. People say that, experts say that no word can be termed as having only the similar meaning. For example, as I told you, in case of camel also, the Arabs have given to their camels at least 150 names. So each name indicates necessarily that there is a difference from this camel to that camel. So nothing can be said with all confidence. The synonym means synonym. Likewise, the idioms, the phrases which have fixed forms and specific meanings, as we know. In Arabic, if someone says that he is or she is zu lisanaini or zata lisanaini, then it means in English a hypocrite, and she is or he is having two tongues. That means she is or he is a hypocrite. Proverbs or sayings. The proverbs or sayings are the parts of culture. For example, in Arabic, if someone says "as-sidqu munjatun," in English, that is this, which as we know that proverbs, sayings, or idioms, proverbs and sayings cannot be changed. It's a structure and other things. It should be as it is. So "as-sidqu munjatun," if an Arab uses this or this word comes somewhere and it is to be translated into English, then "as-sidqu munjatun," honesty is the best policy. So this is fixed. The translator cannot manipulate in that. No, I'll translate like this, I'll translate this way or that way. It's not possible here. So "as-sidqu munjatun," the translator must be knowing about the English terminologies of proverbs or sayings also. And he or she has to translate it as honesty as the best policy. Likewise, in Arabic, an example can be cited here: "as-sadiqu in the ziqi." "As-sadiqu in the ziqi." A friend indeed is a friend indeed. A friend in need is a friend indeed. So neither in English nor in Arabic it can be changed. So if someone is translating from Arabic to English or English to Arabic, these aspects have to be kept in mind necessarily. Likewise, metaphors. And metaphors we know are indirect, non-literal language. They are used to say something and mean something else. The metaphors are difficult to translate as well. In Arabic, I'm giving you one example, but it's a very beautiful example. "Amtarat lu'luwan wasaqat wardan." First, I'm translating in English so that those who do not know Arabic can understand it properly. Rained she can be added, but here must not be added here, but it has to be understood. Rained pearl. and watered flower. That means when a beautiful woman cries, what happens? Tears as pearls and cheeks are as red flowers. So when a woman or girl cries, this kind of picture, in a poet or literary figure, literary personality creates an imagination out of that and say that when she cries, this is translated as almost as if she rained pearls and watered flowers. So this is beautifully done. So this metaphor, if a translator from Arabic to English or English to Arabic does not know the metaphors of both the languages, it will be very difficult for her or him to translate these sentences, these kind of sentences or metaphors properly. Another problem comes for the Arabic into English translator, particularly that is called morphology. In morphology also, the translator, any translator, faces a number of difficulties. This is, as we know, deals with the forms of words. Morphology deals the form. Morphology with the forms of the word. Arabic morphological system is more flexible than the English morphological system. For example, we can say kadima, kadama, yaqdimu, qadiman. Three forms can be used, but not in English. But in the parts of speech, the English morphological system is more flexible. Phonological problems deal with sounds and their effects on their meaning. This primarily occurs in the poetry. This is very, very delicate in Arabic language. This phonological problem, one has, any Arabic learner has to be very careful about the this sound system, sound effect. Slight mistake, those who recite Quran particularly know it very well, that in Quran, one can not make any mistake while pronouncing the words. The sound systems are fixed. If it is, the system is violated, it will be very hard it will never be interesting to listen to that person. So this is problematic. In English also it's there, but slight differences. There are differences between the two the systems. Likewise, another problem which particularly Arabic translator faces, because the Arabic people, particularly in India, people are not very particular about punctuation marks. They think that, okay, this comma or full stop or colon or semicolon, this is broad 3-4 things you can do for everything. So it's not taken very seriously. And some of the Arabs tell us when we tell them that why you do not follow this punctuation marks very and I mean, why don't you persuade it? They said that, okay, the English, the sense is something, Arabic, it comes something else. So we are not bothered too much. But I'm not saying that all Arabs do it. There are many Arabs who follow it very punctually, very systematically. So punctuation marks, but in Arabic called alamatu tarqim. One of the biggest problems for English to Arabic translator is the right use of punctuation marks. The punctuation marks are not taken as seriously in Arabic as they are taken in English. Nevertheless, Arabic translator must be well acquainted with the system of punctuation marks of both the languages. The speaker who was speaking before me, who was reciting a poem of some poet, he also pointed out that even a comma or full stop or semicolon or colon or so on and so forth, even a simple comma may pose a big problem for the translator, because if comma is used, it means that the poet may mean something else, and if it is removed by the translator, that whole idea of the poet will go. So these things are to be kept in mind. The system is to be followed correctly. In the second part of my topic, there are many things to discuss, and I fear that among the participants, many may not be knowing Arabic, so it may not be very interesting. So I'm omitting many things from the paper. But my second part of my paper is the opportunity. What are the opportunities for the translator? I am giving you some of the opportunities there in India. The job opportunities for India's Arabic learners have multiplied specifically during the last 15 to 20 years. For political, economic, diplomatic, and financial reasons, India has emerged as one of the major hubs for the multinational companies. Since India guarantees peace and security, the multinational companies open their offices in different Indian cities and do their businesses with the multinational companies and open their office in different Indian cities. The multinational companies open their offices in different Indian cities and do their businesses with the Arab companies and establishment. Some of the major job providing sectors are given below. I'm talking about specifically in Indian context. Jobs for Arabic learners are available in government agencies and offices such as Intelligence Bureau, RAW, CBI, Indian embassies, consulate generals, and other offices across the Arab world. Teachers in various government universities, colleges, government madrasas across the country, or MNCs, national international banks, financial companies, and the call centers. An important addition to the job market is what's called the medical tourism. A large number of the patients from the different parts of the world come to India for treatment. To deal with these patients and their relatives, many Indian hospitals hire Arabic experts as translators, interpreters, or assistants. This is a thriving sector for the Arabic expert as well. But unfortunately, because of Corona, we all face this problem. Business has almost stopped because of travel ban. But I'm sure that after this pandemic is over, this business will, this quantum of the business, quality of business, or quantum of the business will increase or multiply. Many people have opened offices, bureaucrats to translate movies, books, cartoons, etc. into Arabic or into English from Arabic. Thousands of Arabic experts in India are working in different capacities in various parts of the Arab world, especially in the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Oman, Iraq, and many others, or some more Gulf countries. Some Arabic experts are appointed as the ambassador as well. Some of the posts, some of the people, Arabic experts, have become the ambassadors, Indian ambassadors to different Arab countries. The world agencies like the UN, the Red Cross, hire Indian Arabic experts. Recently, the government of India is very important point for not only Arabic translators, but some other languages also. I'm reading out those names. Government of India, that is the present government, the Prime Minister, which is led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has started a very unique scheme for the translators of Arabic from Arabic to English or from English to Arabic. That is Atal Bhashantar Yojana, to prepare specialized translator or interpreter. The government of India intends to select the language experts from different parts of the country, train them in India, and then they will be sent to Switzerland on government of India expenses to make them the world-class translator or interpreter. The government of India has initially included in this project 6 Asian languages and 3 European languages. Those are Arabic, Chinese, French, Japanese, Russian, and Spanish. In addition to these sectors, there are many other fields or sectors where Arabic experts find their jobs. It may be noted here that Arabic experts generally start with a monthly salary of at least 45,000. Last year, I was asked 100 this translator Arabic to English from Banaras Hindu University itself. But those numbers are not available with us. But after this pandemic is we overcome this when we are able to overcome this pandemic, this job market will once again thrive, and people, the companies, multinational companies, as I told you, referred this earlier, they will be again looking forward, looking after this, looking for this Arabic expert. The last sentence is, in short, Arabic learners or experts are currently getting different kinds of jobs in India and across the world in large numbers. Thus, Arabic is serving the country and its learners, contributing considerably in nation building. To elaborate a little on this topic, this, as I referred, when I told you that in the Gulf countries or the Middle East, many translators are required for a different type of work, but across the world also. For example, in America or Europe, particularly England or France and some other countries, Germany, and if you go to that across this Atlantic, then Canada, America, and sometimes also Brazil, these countries need Arabic experts because of globalization that is common to all of us, the whole world, but particularly because of the immigration, huge number of immigration that has taken place from different countries, particularly from the Middle East or Gulf countries to Europe and America, Canada, and other parts of the world, Australia as well. So because of this immigration, translators are required. And as we know, perhaps most of these immigrants belong to the Arab world. So Arabic translators are required in good number. And when this pandemic is over, I think this the translators, Arabic learners of India will get once again a huge opportunity in different parts of the world, in addition to the opportunities which are available in India and the Middle East. Thanks once again to the officer of the Department of Higher Education, Government of India, and for giving me this opportunity to interact with you. Otherwise, we know we are all confined to our quarters or flats and whatever we have, or homes. So this is a wonderful opportunity. And for this and for everything, I express my gratitude to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for illuminating us upon the nuances of translating from Arabic to English and vice versa, which basically arises owing to disparity in their punctuation marks, gender constructions, nominal and verbal participles, and phonology as well, in a very excellent manner. Moreover, you've also significantly highlighted and put forth the Government of India's recent initiatives on widening the horizons and scope of language learning and translating. So we have certain queries as well related to your session, sir, which I would like you to address. The first one is, are there any specific methods or criteria one should use while translating from Arabic to English? Sorry, sir, you're muted.
Yes, please.
You can take a breather if you want to before answering, sir.
No problem. No problem. No problem. Just I request you to please repeat the question.
So my question is, are there any specific tactics, methods, or criteria one should keep in mind while translating from Arabic to English? Any formulas one should stick to?
Sorry. There are formulas. There are different formulas, or what we'll refer to as a method. When I refer to these methods, I pointed out one specific aspect of these methods is that the translator has to decide the field of or area of translation, whether he is translating, she is translating technical text, any technical text, or literary piece, or the medical terminology or scientific discovery. So therefore, for the different kind of text, the translator has to be acquainted with different kinds of terminology and the word in Arabic, or it's vice versa. So if for example, I translate from English to Arabic or Arabic to English, if you ask me, Urdu or Hindi is almost mother tongue, but I cannot translate in Urdu. In the same text, I can translate it into English, but it will be very difficult because in Urdu, these Urdu or Hindi terminologies, I'm not well versed in those terminologies. So for specific areas, the translator has to be expert, has to be well acquainted with those areas. Otherwise, she or he cannot render those texts into another language. Thank you.
And yet another query is cropped up, sir, and that is, how do we negotiate between the conflict of the tenses of both the languages, as there is a stark conflict of the tenses of both languages? So how to negotiate as a translator?
Yes, very good. I just referred in my paper also to this aspect. When I told you that Arabic is the Semitic language, which is an ancient language and very rich language. In another word, English is entirely different from this language family. It belongs to Indo-European or Indo-Aryan language family. So whether the cultures and civilizations of the Arabs or cultures and civilizations of the English people, particularly England, if we talk about America also, and many parts of the world, there are basic differences between these two languages because their cultures and civilizations are almost entirely different from each other. So if someone is translating a piece of or a book or pages from English to Arabic, the translator must know the nuances of English language and literature and their society as well. Unless he or she is comfortable with that or expert on those areas, he or she cannot justify their translation into Arabic, because these are entirely two different languages, two different civilizations and cultures. So almost nothing can be common in these two areas. So the translator must be very careful about these aspects.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you once again for sharing your wide expertise with us in the simplest possible language and manner. Thank you. We are indebted.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
So this brings us, dear participants, towards the end of day 4 as well. And we are heading towards the conclusion, the final, the culminatory ceremony tomorrow, which is to be held. So the schedule for tomorrow's sessions would be forwarded to you on your mailboxes, through your mails, in the similar fashion as it's being done every day. Thank you. Thank you once again to all of you for being with us.